My name's Colin, I'm the head of school. I think I know most of you, but if not, very warm welcome. We're going to record the beginning and the end of the session, and then the presentation will be available on the website for parents to look at. And then if you want to come back to me at any point thereafter to ask any further questions, please do so. So we're 11 weeks in. We hope your children are enjoying their education at Lumio. We're here to provide you some more information, answer any questions, and develop the relationship we have with parents. Today I'm going to hopefully talk to you about the curriculum, the purpose of the workshop, the International Baccalaureate programs, and the progression to university applications for those of you who want your children to go to university. Okay, so those things will be shared. This presentation will be made available on the school's website. Sam is designing that brilliantly. I hope you've all accessed the website. Previous presentations that we do for the PAG group, we've got some members of the PAG group, the Parent Association group, are also on the website. So for parents to have a look at what we do with the PAG group, what we share information, how we share information, and how we get feedback back, those are all going to be on the website as well. So our vision, hopefully you know the vision because you've chosen to send your children to our school, but that's our school vision. We want to prepare children for life beyond school. That's very difficult because we don't know what that will look like. It's very, very different to what it was when I was at school and university. It's very much different to what you were like when it was at school. The world is changing, technology is changing, so our vision is to try and get the children ready to become successful, responsible citizens and be successful in whatever they want to choose to do in the future. In partnership with you and our local community, in our context in Paphos and in Cyprus, we're going to aim to do that. That's inside and outside of the classroom, and the programs that we'll talk about later on hopefully will start to unpick what that looks like and why it's not so much of a traditional education in the way that many of you and I received. Okay. If we do that, then we'll provide a holistic education that's inclusive, engaging, inspiring, equal opportunities for all. We will stretch the really bright academic students. We will create opportunities for those students who really enjoy sports, the arts, music, to excel and flourish. And we will scaffold and support students who need a little bit more help in their learning so that everyone can be successful. That's our aim, that's our vision, that's hopefully why you're here. We've got a really wonderful opportunity where cultural differences, social differences come together, personal differences, and our job is to make sure that as a school community, as a local community, we educate children to understand that there are differences in the world, and we do that in a positive way. Our values are really important to us, and again, I hope your children can start understanding the values and practice as we embed those. But we want to create a school community built on respect, kindness, compassion, and charity. Those things, again, will come through the IB curriculum. We want to ensure there's a child-centred, inclusive international learning community. Coffees, those of you who ordered coffee, can you just let Denise know so that we can get that? Thank you. We're very keen for, the founder and I are very keen that it's a holistic education. And what we mean by holistic is that we cover all bases. We focus on well-being, on mental health, on sports, on exercise, on academia, on social aspects. We want to develop the range of skills that children, teenagers can progress and then be successful citizens. We want to develop independence, curiosity, creativity, innovation, embed critical thinking and problem solving, and explore passions, interests, and areas of personal development and growth. So that's our values, that's what we try and do. All the decisions we make at school go back to those values, and I try and hold myself and the staff to account against those values. Hopefully you should be holding us account against those values, and decisions that we make, you should be saying, do they meet with those values? And hopefully they are, and they will, and they continue to do so. So we have a learning framework which is based on button working. It's based on the advisor model. So we don't call our teachers teachers. We call them advisors based on this framework. And we want this framework to be happening in the learning environment constantly. Not every lesson, each of those aspects will be identified, but through the learning process, this is how we want the educators, the advisors, to teach your children. So we start with assessing the student needs, A, to understand how that manifests itself into the teaching process. Not all children come with the same starting point, clearly. Many children come with different English levels, many children come with different maths levels, different knowledge of science, and so on and so forth. So part of our ongoing process is to assess the children. Then we design learning activities based on that assessment. And the manifesto principles there come from the International Coaching Federation. So we want the teachers to be more of a coach rather than a traditional teacher who stands up in front of the class and just provides information. We don't feel that that's the best way to learn in an international education. We want it to be much more of a partnership. Okay? So the things down the right-hand side there are aspects of coaching that we built into our framework. So once we've designed learning activities, and those learning activities are not generally turn to page 15 in the textbook and then we're going to go through to page 19. It's much more bespoke, much more creative, hopefully much more interesting and engaging, and hopefully the learning process is better than just a teacher providing information and the children being expected to remember that information to sit a test in a period of time. And we'll talk about why that's not so important as we go through the presentation. So then we validate understanding through lots of questioning. We check constantly that the children understand what the learning design is, what the success criteria is, what the objectives are. Then we implement the learning strategies, and we hope that that's a range of strategies. We hope that there's group work, there's individual work, there's designing activities, there's preparing speeches, there's working in collaboration. Sometimes there's preparing for a test, but there's a whole range of activities that are involved in the learning process. Then we support the skill development, because it's not just about academics. It's also about how you work as a team. It's how you listen to each other. It's how you understand that everyone is different. Sometimes you take the lead in a session. Sometimes you're being led in a session. Sometimes you evaluate the performance of others in a session. Sometimes you're asked to think critically about a concept that's put forward to you. So those skills go across the subject and are not specific to a subject. And then we orchestrate collaborative learning, and we want the children to be very much engaged in that. We don't want all the children to be doing exactly the same, based on their needs, based on their strengths, based on their ability to perform and to understand. We will change the learning activities. And then we review and reflect on the learning. Sometimes that's through self-reflection. Sometimes that's through quizzes. Sometimes that's through tests. Sometimes that's through children doing a presentation on their own or in groups. So that reflection and review of learning is sometimes formative to inform the next stage, and sometimes summative, where you summarize the learning that's been achieved in the last 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, or indeed the whole year. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. That's what we're trying to achieve for your children every day. They won't see that every day in every lesson, but when Donna and I and the other middle leaders and senior leaders go into lessons, we are constantly challenging the advisors to use this to make sure that it becomes part of our culture, what we're doing every day. Okay. So within that framework, we try and build an inclusive learning community. We focus on the holistic development. Yesterday we were invited to some fantastic learning in science, where the children were designing Monopoly but science-based, and they were engaging with us and all the teachers who weren't teaching at that time, the advisors who weren't teaching, and other children went to engage, and the children were talking about science. And that's a different way of learning about science than doing some work in a textbook and then doing a test. And we hope that that becomes much more relevant. And we're going to share that with you through Toddle in a couple of weeks. So there will be uploads to Toddle for you to see what your children are learning. And then you can talk to your children and learn. Because if your children are anything like my two children, 22 and 20 now, when I said to them for the last 15 years, what did you learn at school today? Oh, nothing, it was boring. All children say that. Hopefully you'll be able to see what your children have learned, because we'll send you little prompts and little images or little examples of what your children are learning on Toddle, and then you can have that conversation with them about, oh, I saw you do this today, tell me about it. And that's where we'll develop the partnership. So that's coming next week. And Donna and Terry, two members of the senior leadership team, have put together a little parents' information booklet about how to access Toddle and what we will do and how the teachers' advisors will support you in learning through Toddle. So we promote learner autonomy through inquiry-based concepts. I'll talk about that in a moment. We use research and responsive teaching to incorporate learning and assessment, and how we develop both of those things. And we deliver a transdisciplinary project-based learning approach. So we teach science as science, and we teach math as math, and we teach English, but there are times where we group those subjects together, or we identify key learning outcomes from different subjects, and we put those into projects. And then those projects pick out things from different subjects and different skills. And that's an important part of our curriculum now, and an important part of the IB moving forward. Okay. So we are not just making this up as we go along. We are bespoke. We are going to be contextualized, but on next Tuesday we have Cambridge International Assessment coming to the school to assess our application to become a Cambridge accredited school, where we can then lean on some of those resources. We can use some of their assessments, and we're not going to rigidly follow an assessment that's off the shelf, because we don't want to do that. We want to pick the best parts of a framework and assessment and then use that in context. We want the advisors to be creative, but we want there to be some rigor in what we deliver. So Cambridge will be much more of the primary focus, and then the International Baccalaureate will be much more of the middle years and the secondary focus. Okay, so both of those processes, we're in the application phase at the moment. When we open a school, you can't just become a Cambridge school or an IB school. To be an IB World School, it takes 12 to 18 months of applications, which we've started. And then we have to send everyone off to be trained, and then they have to come and assess us, and it's not as simple, we're now an IB school. So we have to demonstrate through our curriculum that we are delivering an IB philosophy before the IB come along and grant us status to be an IB World School. So Donna's going to Mumbai in February to be the head of school MYP lead. I'm going to Italy in March to do my refresher training for the DP program, and then we have to invite the IB in to train all our teachers. Okay, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so Cambridge is much more of a primary focus. The IB is much more of a middle years and a secondary focus. And the programs, so we'll talk about the programs in a moment. So before we do talk about the programs, that traditionally you were probably taught in a way where the teacher stands up, does most of the work in the lesson, shares some information with you. There's textbooks or resources. You go through that learning process, and then you build up towards an exam at the end of that process. Things have moved on a little bit. Concept-based learning is more than learning a set of facts. It's about how you understand the facts in context. It's about how you use the knowledge that you're learning and the skills that go alongside the knowledge to understand that learning is not a singular process, it's much more conceptual. Okay, so the concepts we link together, so students learn to link subjects, because no one in their working world just focuses on one thing ever. You pick out things that you've learned and your experiences that you learn, and then you apply those in the context that you're in. So concept-based learning is very much about taking the key information, the facts, but using it in a productive way. And we try and do that through our curriculum. Similarly, inquiry-based Button's not working very well. You can see by the picture, this is not a new concept. Inquiry-based learning encourages the children to ask many more questions, to generate questions, to come up with key concepts, key ideas, to look at a stimulus, to look at information, and then to generate what they might learn about that. Then the advisor will have a framework, but it's much more about assessing the children's needs, and then based on where the children are at any point in time, there's more flexibility and more creativity between the adult and the children in the class. Okay. So I'm sure everyone's heard that. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So we involve the children in the learning process. We might say to them, here's a globe as a resource. What do you think that happens when the world moves? How do you think that works? What scientific concepts are there for that project, for that piece of learning that we're going to do over the next 2 or 3 weeks? And the children might come up with questions and they might collaborate, talk to each other. Those questions will then be used to follow up the learning. Okay? So we put that into a cycle, and the cycle is obviously cyclical in nature, and you can start at any point, but you should go through that range of experiences within the learning cycle. So there's some examples there about, if you're learning about the rainforest, you might put a video on, you might ask some questions, or you might put the video on and ask the children, okay, generate 3 questions, then walk around the room and share your questions with the other people, and then you have 10 questions. From those 10 questions, how many of those questions do you already know the answers to? So that's how the learning is a little bit different to the teacher standing up and saying, right, everyone's got to answer these questions. And here's the textbook for you to answer those questions. It's much more interactive. Okay. So then you go into explore different aspects of the ecosystem, which may be generated from the questions that the children provide. Then you ask them to explain their knowledge in different ways. Some children are just not very good at exams. Their memory, going from short-term to medium-term to long-term memory, works differently to the person sat next to them. So that constant feedback about explain, tell me, ask questions, what does that mean? And then the advisor will be constantly assessing where the children are in their learning. And then we'll share that with you 3 points in the year. And then we elaborate on that. And that's where we push and pull, and that's where we stretch more able children. That's where we have projects and project-based learning. So we don't put a ceiling on the learning. The children who are really bright and interested in geography or the ecosystem, or science and the ecosystem, who may want to do that in their life later on, we then encourage them to go a little bit further than what was the expected standard, because we can do that. So hopefully that makes sense. And then we get the reflection and evaluation, and that's really important. So it's not just the teacher marking a test or an essay. It's very much more about asking the children to reflect from their own perspective and sometimes from each other's perspective. Okay. So we use the phrase project-based learning, PBL. We have PBL lessons where we have a central idea. It could be through a subject focus, or it could be something wider. Then we have transfer goals, so what the children are expected to do and how they transfer through the learning. Then we generate questions. The children generate questions, or we generate questions with the children. Then we do the learning experience. Then we have performance tasks, which are assessments. And then we link the skills into those performance tasks and the preparation and how we get to that outcome. And we then develop that into an example. So here's a grasp. So when you are able to see toddle, and when you're able to see what the advisors are planning for your children, you will see some of the grasps, which is the assessment process of how we put all that learning together. So creating a sustainable future through climate action. This is one of the things that has been taught this term. So the goal is to develop a climate action plan based on the school's footprint. The role is for the students to become environmental advocates. The audience is the school members' community, so me or Donna or members of the admin team will be asked to go in and be part of a presentation that the children may share. The situation as climate affects the local environment. How do we do that contextually where we are in the world? Which is why the IB is so important, because it doesn't give you a curriculum. There is no curriculum that the IB give to schools, because in Guatemala or Brazil or Argentina or Cyprus or London or Mexico or Beijing, it's different, because you learn about the context and the environment you're in. So they don't give you a criteria, a curriculum. They give you a framework and a set of skills, and there are tests at the end of that process, which we'll talk about, but there is no off-the-shelf, here's a curriculum, which is very different to most of the schools that you and I went to. Okay. Then there is a product or a performance, so the students will present their ideas and their learning to an audience. Hopefully the audience will ask questions, and that's where you have to extend your learning. That's where the more confident students will be able to articulate their answers in a different way, or if they're quieter, they may be able to do the work behind the presentation, but may not stand up and do the presentation. And then the advisors will make sure that the rotation happens so that the same people don't always stand at the front and talk. Everyone learns to develop the skills that are targets that the advisors give them throughout the course of the year. And then there are assessment rubrics with descriptions where we say 1 out of 7. 7 is fantastic, great. 1 is the other end. So somewhere in the middle, and then there'll be targets set based on the assessment. Okay? So there is a structure and there is assessment, but it's contextualized and it's created in context by the advisors through a framework that is not something that's just bought and presented and a textbook-driven process. Okay? So I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So this guy's John Hattie. He's probably done the most educational research in the last 20 years about how effective learning happens through feedback. And responsive teaching means that you don't teach to a curriculum with a very set objective. You respond and you adapt the teaching to the needs of the children in front of you, which kind of makes sense. Responsive teaching is not just everyone gets the same. You respond to the children and you adapt the teaching to meet the needs of the children. Okay? The feedback is really important in that. So the formative feedback, the questions, every time you sit down and explain something, the scaffolding. So the children who may not have such a high level of English just yet, they'll require more scaffolding to understand the concepts and the information that the advisor is teaching. Okay? And then over time you reduce the scaffolding, and you may ask much more open-ended questions, and you ask the children to develop and elaborate their responses in a different way. So not everyone does exactly the same. And the single biggest influence in successful learning over his 20 years of educational research is giving feedback from the adult to the children and from the children to the children. And that continual feedback is not just, we start this work and in 6 weeks' time you have a test. And then the test is just forgotten. If we do have assessments or quizzes or tests, then the key thing about a test is what you didn't know and how we then put that back into the learning to help you to develop the things that you didn't do so well in the test. So there's much more Quizlets and much more regular little exit tickets at the end of lessons or different ways to assess the children's understanding rather than we build up and we do a test at the end of the year. We do those, but that's not the most important way to assess the children's learning. Okay? I'll come over this side. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so a move away from the traditional approach. I'll let you read that. There is less of what I'm doing and much more of coaching and mentoring the learning. There is not a reliance on a textbook There are some textbooks that the teachers' advisors use. There are some resources, clearly. But there's not a textbook that is quickly outdated, that follows the same program year on year on year, and teaches and uses the same process year on year on year. Textbooks change. The teachers at the moment, the advisors at the moment, are looking at the curriculum. They're developing the resources. They will continue to do that in an ongoing, active way. It won't be, here's the curriculum, here's the resources, and we teach the same thing to year 7s for the next 5 years. That's not responsive teaching. That's just teaching a curriculum and not teaching the children. Hopefully that makes sense. So there's greater student choice and ownership. We want the advisors to go in and say, okay, we're going to be doing this today. Here's the success criteria. Some people may want to do this activity. Some people may want to do this activity. There's more choice for the students to develop their independence and their curiosity and their confidence in learning in different ways. And then the advisors will shape and help them to make the right choices. It's a balanced approach between skills and knowledge through coursework, rather than learning assessment, learning assessment, learning assessment. The coursework is really important. We'll come on to homework in a moment, because I know lots of you are asking questions about homework. But a personalised approach with individual targets. So when the reports come out on the 12th of December, and then when hopefully you meet the advisors on the 13th, there will be personalised targets from each subject, what we want the children to achieve and how they can develop from January through to April. And then there'll be another report in April, and then again targets will be set between April and June, and at the end of the year there will be a third report to parents, which you'll access through Toddle, which hopefully will talk about the success from the targets that were given and targets for the following year. Some of those targets will be subject-based, some of those targets will be skills-based. That's what a holistic education is. It's not just the content of the subject, it's the learning skills that are important. So there is an academic steering group, so less emphasis on just testing in an old-fashioned way. There are some assessments, there are some tests. We will be doing tests in English, Maths and Science through GL assessment, which is a global assessment base, which is irrespective of the curriculum that a school develops. So whether you're in the Middle East, whether you're an international school in London or Madrid or Argentina or Europe, GL assessment is the go-to assessment to sort of standardise learning in English, Maths and Science. So we will do that at the end of each academic year for, I think, grades 4 and above. They don't do tests for less than grade 3. So the academic steering group down the bottom, so that's a group of teachers who are working with Dr. Terry McAdams, who some of you have met. They're looking at the benefits and the merits of homework. So there are lots and lots of positives to homework, and there are lots of negatives to homework. Okay? I don't think we'll ever agree on it. As a parent, I didn't want my children to do boring homework that I didn't think was developing their learning. I would rather them have flipped learning or extended based learning projects, rather than you've got to do 10 questions for science ready for a test the next day, because revising the night before a test isn't actually very helpful to do the test. It's about learning in the last 3 or 4 weeks and understanding the test, and then being able to answer a question on what you've learned is much better than doing a revision session the night before. Okay. So flipped learning is, we're going to be learning about climate, do some work in the previous 2 weeks before we start that, so we have that understanding, and then we can talk to the children about assessing their needs about the climate before we then design the learning activities. There is some evidence to say that in maths, you might well develop well to do 10 questions every 3 or 4 days on the topic that you're learning, because that's one of the only sort of long-term memory processes that learning how to do something is important, but it's a double-edged sword, because no maths question in any maths paper is written in the same way that any test revision question is written. Maths questions are always about apply that process in this question. rather than just do the question. So it's really important that we go further than just doing revision questions, because if you learn by rote and the questions in the test paper are never the same as the revision questions. It doesn't matter how well you prepare, they're always different. And we'll talk about universities in a moment, because that's the way university applications now work, which was a little different to when I and many of you went to university. So we are moving away from a traditional approach, and you're all here because you've got children in grade 6, 7, 8 or 9. There are 4 programs in the IB, the International Baccalaureate: the primary years, middle years, diploma and careers. The careers is quite new, only developed 3 or 4 years ago. We'll talk about each one. We follow the philosophy of the middle years program, but we're not actually going to go and buy and train all of our teachers to be PYP teachers. We are going to do that for MYP and DP and CP. So MYP is grade 7 to 10, and that's the middle years program. Then there's the diploma program, which is grades 11 and 12. That's the equivalent to A-levels in the UK. And the careers program is also 11 to 12, and that's a little bit more vocational and practically based than just academic. And I'll talk about the difference in a moment. So that's quite a new program. The IB traditionally has been much more academic than every other curriculum in the world, even though they don't give you a curriculum. The person who wrote the IB is a very, very rich Swiss guy, and he sold a philosophy. He created a philosophy of learning rather than a curriculum where people follow. Great business concept. And every single person in the world who teaches it has to go on one of his training courses. And then every school has to buy it, and it's really expensive. It's probably going to cost 150,000 euros for us to be an IB school. 150,000.
For a year?
No, about 20 a year, 150 up front. So there's an ongoing cost, but everyone has to be trained.
But it's a sort of success. I mean, he managed to develop something.
Yes, absolutely. And it's getting more popular. And I'll talk about why it's getting more popular now. So the upfront costs to develop the 3 programs that we're going to introduce in the next 12 to 18 months, then hopefully we'll be accredited as an IB World School, it's going to cost 150,000 euros. Then there's about a 20,000 on annual cost fee to retain that status. Slightly less for Cambridge, but still expensive. Okay, so we're applying for middle years, diploma and careers program. Recently, so some years ago, I did the training for the MYP, and it was very soft and less rigorous than I and many educators around the world felt it should be. There was no standardized assessments. At the end of the program, everyone is assessed. There is now. There are e-assessments for subjects, which you can work towards, and the children are assessed. So you as parents, us as educators, can compare and standardize the learning that happens in our school against other schools who are IB schools. And part of the process, we have to demonstrate that our curriculum is following the philosophy that they do, which is inquiry-based learning, is creative enough, is contextual enough, but it's rigorous enough for us to do the assessments, to lead the children to the DP, which is the diploma program, which I'll talk about in a moment. Hopefully I'm not going too quickly, and hopefully you're writing lots of questions down, which we'll get to in a moment. So, the core areas of learning within the DP program, within all the programs, there are 6 areas. So, language and literature, English A and English B. Language acquisition, so you can study some subjects in your native language if English is not strong enough. So Russian, Hebrew, Greek, you can do tests in those subjects through the IB, which is obviously a benefit from an international school, Chinese and so on and so forth. We have to identify the children and then we have to provide evidence that their English is not at a sufficient level if we choose to go down that route. Okay. Then it's humanities, but it's called societies and individuals. And within humanities, there are business studies, geography, history, psychology, economics, digital literacy, business management, and environmental systems and sciences. Then you've got sciences, the three traditional science, but then there's computer science, design, technology, sport, exercise, and health science. Then maths, there's two areas of maths, analysis and approaches, and applications and interpretation. And then the arts, visual arts, music, drama, and theatre. So no, very, very, very few IB schools in the world offer all of those subjects. Every single person who teaches each of those subjects has to be trained by the IB. Okay? It's €950 per training, and it's normally somewhere else in the world, and you've got to fly there, stay in a hotel. That's where the costs come. We're going to bring the IB over to us in April to train the philosophy so that we can be part of that process, but then the actual subject leaders have to all go and get trained by the IB for us to be an IB school. Donna and I have to go and do that. We have to have someone who's responsible for different sessions, and that's why they make so much money, because you can't be an accredited IB school until you go through all those processes. That's why it takes 12 to 18 months. So we will start teaching some of the IB processes from January, because we've started the application process. Then it's 12 to 18 months for the middle years programme. The diploma programme is for the current grade 9, but that won't start for another 2 years. So we have 2 years before we have to start that programme for me to appoint people who are ready to teach the subjects that we don't teach in the middle years programme in the diploma programme. Okay? So there are 6 subjects, and within each subject there is a standard level and a higher level. So this is where we start differentiating between children of different abilities. So this is the diploma programme only. So the very, very bright mathematicians, STEM subjects, children who are interested in those areas will obviously do higher level. And then if you're less good in art or music, or vice versa, if you're very good in music, arts, drama, theatre, sport, you might do the high level in those subjects, and you might do the standard level in the more academic subjects if you're less academic. And we will obviously encourage the children to do the different levels once we know their progress and once we understand them a little better.
A quick question, but you don't need to choose out of those 6, right? You need to follow all the 6.
Yes, you have to, I'm coming to that. No, that's a good question. Yes. You have to choose subjects within each of those 6 categories. Okay, so I'll come.
There should be 6. It's not that you choose one.
No. So you have to do.
All the 6.
Yeah, you have to do one of the subjects in humanities, at least, and it could be geography. You have to do one of the sciences, but you can actually be creative and do 2 of the sciences, and one of them could be one of the subjects from here. But that, we'll talk about that.
And if we compare International Baccalaureate to A-level, let's say.
Yeah.
In A-level, you have only 3 subjects.
Yeah, three subjects. So my son's just done A-levels. He did economics, maths, and psychology. He's at university. He's sitting with children who did the baccalaureate, International Baccalaureate, and they did 6 subjects at the same level that he did 3. And they're much brighter, and they learn in a better way. And it's really interesting that he's coming back to me. He's doing an economics major. He's coming back to me and saying, they just think differently.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But we'll come on to that, for sure. That's a good question. No problem. So, in addition to all of those subjects, this is where the IB is really great in preparing children to go to university, teenagers to go to university. Because you have to do these 3 other areas, and they're graded. And if you fail any one of these areas, you fail the IB. So we will be teaching the children from now to start thinking about how to do the theory of knowledge, how to do an extended essay, and the creativity, activity and service, the charity element. We will start getting the grade 9 to think about that now, and then the grade 8 and the grade 7. Okay. We are going to introduce a special course next year for the current grade 9 in grade 10, which is like a pre-IB course to help them to understand this in a little bit more detail, because they are new to learning in this way, and they obviously will not be as well prepared as the grade 8 and the grade 7, who will have more time to prepare, ready for these aspects of the DP program. Okay, so you have to get so many points. So each section is worth 7 points, and then the TOK and the EE are 3 bonus points. So to pass the IB, you have to get 24 points out of the 6 subjects and the 3 core elements. It's a little complicated, but we'll share this much more detail with you as the children go through it. Okay, so 6 subjects plus these 3 areas is the totality of the IB DP program. And it's difficult, it's challenging. It's fantastic, but it's challenging. Okay. So they have to do maths. You have to do English. You have to do humanities. You have to do a science. You have to do an arts. Okay. So, the theory of knowledge and the extended essay, there's a little bit of information there. So it's an essay about learning, but you do it in a subject. So if your son or daughter is really keen in the arts, then their theory of knowledge essay and their extended essay can be on the arts. And it's something that they choose. If they're really keen on robotics and physics and maths, it can be on robotics. So we will help them to understand how to best demonstrate their learning through this aspect of the course, which they have to pass to make sure that they pass. But it also develops their interest, because the chances are the subjects that they choose at university will probably be linked to the subject that they choose for their theory of knowledge and their extended essay. So it's a preparation step to university. The CAS, that's why working in the local community and working in the local context is so important, because the children have to do some charitable, voluntary work, learning, and demonstrate their learning from that. Okay? And again, we'll create opportunities for them to do that, and then they have to demonstrate the outcomes of that CAS element of the course. So, it gets a little bit technical now, but within each of the 6 subjects, you have to do some at high level and some at standard level. So that's where we guide the children, and we know the children, we know your children, and we say, okay, you're probably better doing high level in these subjects and standard level in these subjects. Yeah. And then we'll talk to you about it, clearly. We'll have lots more conversations like this, and we'll have lots more individual conversations with you and your children about the choices that they make. Now, we can't and we won't offer all of the 9 subjects within the humanities bracket. We're just too small, and it would be just too expensive. No school in the world does that, unless you've got a school of 3,000 students who pay a lot more fees than you do. Because it's very, very expensive. But we will have a range of subjects within the humanities. We will have a range of subjects within the sciences. We'll obviously do English and maths. But there will be choices. The arts, we have a drama teacher, which is great. We have art teachers, great. We have music teachers, great. And we will be introducing DT. Now, DT can be an art or it can be a science, because DT can be classed as engineering or STEM, or it can be classed as art. So once we've got our DT suite, which we're designing at the moment, we will have the opportunity to push your children and guide your children in different ways. Okay, so you have to pass every one of the 6 areas. You can't fail any. 1 to 7 is the grade. So you have to pass. You have to get minimum of 1 for each of the subjects. But you have to get a minimum of 24 overall. So that's why it's so much more difficult than A-levels, where you just choose 3 subjects. You have to study 6 subjects in a similar depth to you would as the 3 subjects at A-level. So it's really academic. The careers program is slightly less, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so you fail, hopefully you won't have anyone who fails, if you have less than 24 points, if you have a grade 1 in any of the subjects, and you get an E in the theory of knowledge or the extended essay. And you don't complete the CAS, which is so many hours of charitable work where you have to turn up and you have to be resilient and you have to be grown up and you have to do things that your mum and dad don't tell you to do, and you have to do that and then write about it and do a project on it. Okay? So that developing the independence and the choices that we try and do from early progresses into what the children need before they leave to go to university. And university nowadays is so different than it was then when many of you were at university. So the CP program is new. It's designed for children and learners who maybe are more career focused and less just focusing on academia. Okay, so they've developed this in the last, I think, 4 years. You still have to do 2 of the DP subjects at standard or high level, but then the other aspects of the CP course is much more personalised. Okay, so it's a little bit more, excuse me, vocational and less academic, but you still have to do some academic study. But you choose 2 of the 6 areas to do the academic study in. We will talk to you more about that as the children get into grade 11 and 12. And we will prepare you and the children, and we'll suggest whether it's a DP route or a CP route. Okay? We've got...
I'm so sorry. Following this career-related pathway means that the kids won't be able to attend the university?
No, not at all. No, they can. No, they can attend universities. The universities that they would go to would probably be more vocational and relative to the subject and the area and their expertise and their interests than maybe a straight academic course. So yes, you absolutely can go to university on the CP program, for sure.
Would it be of a different level?
Yes, probably, yes. If we're going to be hierarchical, it's probably not going to be MIT, Harvard, Yale, Madrid, Barcelona, Cambridge, Oxford. It's probably going to be more specific to an area of career that you want to get into, which is why it's called the careers program. Yeah. So there may be apprenticeships, there may be work-related opportunities. We would have to work with employers locally. Many of you may be able to help us. If you have businesses or you know people who run businesses, it's much more personalised than traditional academic learning. Okay. And being an inclusive school and being a holistic school and not having an entry exam and welcoming children of all different abilities, I'm really pleased that the IB have created something that's a little bit more vocational than just straight academia. We will do both, but it's really important that you understand that there are options should your son or daughter not want to do a really rigorous academic program. Okay? So there are core components within that. There is PPS, as you can see there. There's service learning, and there's a reflective project. It's just not quite as academic. It's much more about your learning in context. How are you going to be the best of yourself within that environment? Okay. So I think this is really good. It's new and they're still developing it, and it's a little more difficult for really rural schools because you have to develop partnerships with other businesses and opportunities to help the children. But we're fortunate enough that Cyprus is big enough for us to do that. Okay, so the learner profile, again, we can't say we're doing this yet because we're not an IB World school. So the skills that we will be talking about in the reports that come out soon, and the skills that we are developing through your children and through the way we are teaching, focus on some of these things. I know you can't see them, but so it says inquirers, knowledgeable, thinkers, communicators, principled, reflective, balanced, risk takers, caring and open-minded. So we develop skills at the moment, but we've done a bespoke Lumio skills curriculum because we're not legally allowed to do this because we haven't got the accreditation yet. We're not legally allowed to do the Cambridge one yet because we haven't got the accreditation. So our bespoke framework takes a combination of both, and it's just critical thinking, problem solving, communication, empathetic, understanding other people, presentation skills. It's not too different from this. Once we have this, we will focus on the learning profile. And universities love this because it's not skills, it's not knowledge based. It goes across all subjects. Okay. So, the research. There's lots and lots of research, both positive and less so, but the vast majority of universities in the world welcome and indeed prefer the IB over the American curriculum, the UK curriculum, traditional A-levels, the Indian curriculum, because of the 6 areas of study and because of the 3 core components. Okay. So the top universities around the world welcome applications from the IB. Because when you go to university now, you have to do an interview rather than just give them your grades. So my son, who's just recently gone through this process, he applied for 6 universities in the UK. Each one of the universities had to go and attend or do a virtual interview that wasn't about his subjects. And he found it really difficult because he was maths, economics and psychology, and they were asking him questions about literature and how do you learn in sociology and community and the things that he hadn't really thought they would be asking him about to get into. He had interviews at Oxford and Cambridge and Edinburgh and Durham. He ended up at Bristol. But it was all very similar in those red brick top 10 universities in the UK. The process was not about what grades you got. It was about the interview process and how are you going to develop and how are you going to be a good learner in our university. So, the reasons that universities are sharing this, and I've put there about my personal experience and my son's personal experience, is that the students come out of university who have been graduates of the IB with higher grades because of the process and the learning that they've had in the previous 5 or 7 years. Because university is much more coursework based and much less exam based at the end of the course. It's much more about ongoing assessment. It's much more about lecture, seminar, individual discussions with professors than it was previously, which is much more aligned to the IB way of thinking. And it's just not working very well. So, the reason the universities value the IB more is the academic rigour, the 6 subjects rather than 3, the emphasis on critical thinking and research, because that's what you do at university. You're asked to critically think and research and apply your knowledge in different ways. The extended essay and the paper that you write prepares for dissertations that you have to write at university. Most courses, 90% of courses at university, is not an exam at the end of it. It's a thesis or a dissertation. So the preparation for that comes through the extended essay and the work that we'll be teaching your children to do in order to be successful when they get to university. It's a global perspective. The holistic development of not just studying literature. If you're wanting to study literature, you have to know about humanities, you have to know about maths, you have to know about the sciences, because they all interrelate to literature. The preparation for university life, about time management, discipline, organisational skills, working with friends and colleagues, reflecting on your own self, are all things that university students are expected to do. So the admissions process to university, again, may have changed since you went to university. It has been since I went to university, from my children going to university and preparing children in schools that I've led previously. It's much less about the subjects that you taught. It's more about how you apply yourself through the application process. Most universities, you have to write a personal statement, and that personal statement has to touch on your learner profile, how you as an individual have learned and gained, and the experiences you have in order to prepare you for university life and the studies that happen at university. And there are very, very few exams at university. It's much more formative, it's much more essay driven. There are few final exams, unless you go into medicine or something where you have to actually do it. But again, they're practical exams. So we will have someone in the team who will prepare students for their university applications based on what's required at the time before they go to apply for universities. And that'll be part of our extended team in the next couple of years. And the standardisation, so the IB is globally standardised and globally recognised, and I think the middle years programme has helped with that, because what used to happen is that the middle years programme didn't have an assessment at the end, so schools internationally would do the IGCSE as a sort of badge, a standardisation of where the children were at. So the assessment that they've brought in the last 2 or 3 years replaces the necessity to do the IB and IGCSEs before you do DP. Most people and most universities think the DP programme is by far the best programme in the world. The one before that was a little bit debatable. It was a little bit soft and a little bit fluffy and a little bit lacking in rigour and standardisation. So that's why they've introduced some assessment, which we're really pleased for. Our advisors really want the assessment because it gives them something to work towards. And I think some children feel that as well, but not as much as they should. So please don't worry that we're not testing the children all the time, because that's not what we want to prepare them to do. We don't want to prepare them to just sit an exam and sit another exam and sit another exam, because that doesn't happen at university as much as it used to. So, Ivy League, Oxbridge, gap year students. So universities just prefer IB students for all the reasons we've discussed.